I'm Patrick Pacheco. Coming up on Theater All the Moving Parts, a chat with popular columnist Michael Riedel on his fascinating and dishy new book, Singular Sensation: The Triumph of Broadway. Hello, I'm Patrick Pacheco. Welcome to this virtual episode of Theater All the Moving Parts and a conversation with theater columnist and writer Michael Riedel. His intriguing new book, Singular Sensation, is a telling look at the phenomenal success of Broadway in the 90s. Welcome, Michael, and I gotta tell you that as much as I liked Razzle Dazzle, I like this book even more, and I am totally jealous.
Well, you like this more because it's shorter than Razzle Dazzle, and I know you don't like long books, Patrick.
Well, there you go. There you go. But in the pages that it does have, you do actually go back to this period. Why this period in the 90s, Michael?
Well, my first book, Razzle Dazzle, The Battle for Broadway, was about a time in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s when the city was falling apart, when Times Square was dangerous. And Patrick, you and I were there back in those days. And you did not think that Broadway could keep it together. And then because of the Schuberts and Jimmy Niederlander and shows like Chorus Line and Dreamgirls and Annie, they kind of held it together. But Patrick, you and I met, I think, about 1989, 1990. And then we saw the 90s explode on Broadway. We saw a moment in time that decade where shows like Rent, Chicago, Angels in America, The Lion King, The Producers with Mel Brooks, they became as popular as any TV show or any movie at the time. So we lived through the time when Broadway was kind of the backwater. Remember that? When
Right.
it was sort of,
Yep.
it was like the tail end of the entertainment business.
Absolutely.
We lived to see those shows, Rent, Chicago, Lion King. They became as popular as any TV series or movie at the time.
Now, Michael, you covered them in your inimitable snarky way in your column in the New York Post. How did it feel to come back to them for the book? Weren't you bored?
No, I wasn't, because what I learned, Patrick, as a reporter, and you're a reporter too, we learned that we had no clue what was going on. We really didn't at the time. So I went back and I interviewed everybody involved in those shows. And I learned how much we didn't know. Because they could not tell us all the things that were going on. But with 20 years' time, they could tell us then. So to me, it's not a memoir. It's not a collection of my columns. It's me just going back as a reporter, saying to people, what happened here? Did you know that this was going to be a big hit? Did you know that this show was going to be a big success? And everybody, as you well know, did not know what they had on their hands back in those days.
How could they actually? I mean, that's just the nature of theater, right? Nobody knows.
Right.
Nothing.
But that's what I tried to capture. We know Rent's a hit. We know Chicago's a hit. We know The Lion King is a hit. But if you read my book, the people who created those shows did not know they were going to be hits.
How pivotal was Rent to the success, to prime the engine of the success of Broadway in the 90s?
Rent is a key moment in the history of Broadway, because you remember, Patrick, in the 80s, it was all Andrew Lloyd Webber and Cameron Mackintosh shows. It was big, gigantic, spectacles. The British invasion was going on. We had Cats, we had Phantom, we had Les Mis, we had Miss Saigon, and then we had Sunset Boulevard. And we thought at the time, this is the way Broadway is going to go. These gigantic shows where you spend $15, $20 million on them with a big star and big special effects. And Sunset Boulevard opens on Broadway, riven by the tension between Patti LuPone and Faye Dunaway. And Andrew fired Patti and fired Faye and had a big blow up with Glenn Close. And to me, were you there the opening night at Sunset Boulevard? I was there.
No, I may have been. I probably was, but I can't remember much about it. You brought up Sunset Boulevard, but before we go there, I wanted to go back to Rent. How telling was the phrase in the marketing of Rent, don't you hate the word musical? How
Well,
much did that shift the mentality of people going to the theater?
what I was going to say though, that Sunset Boulevard was so heavy, so big, and yet it imploded. The whole thing fell apart. And Andrew Lloyd Webber wins the Tony Award in 1995 for Best Musical because there was nothing else but
Right,
Smokey Joe's Cafe.
right.
And the next year, he presents the Tony Award posthumously to Jonathan Larson for Rent. And we had never heard of Jonathan Larson.
Mm-hmm.
Shift happens. The British are gone, they're out. And all of a sudden, this kid we'd never heard of comes along and changes the whole terrain. The British are gone. Andrew Lloyd Webber, Cameron Mackintosh, they're gone. And this kid you'd never heard of before suddenly wins the Tony Award posthumously because he died the very night he had his dress rehearsal down at the New York Theater Workshop. And he went home after that dress rehearsal. And I try to detail this in the book. He went home so happy. He was so happy that he achieved this show. Put a tea kettle on and boom, before the tea boiled, he was dead on his floor because of an aneurysm. Mm. That's a shift. It's kind of the end of one world and a new world begins. And that new world is what I try to detail in the book. The Americans are back in charge. The British are gone. Cameron and Andrew are out. And Jonathan Larson is now the way into the return of the American musical.
And he's bringing in a whole new audience. People that hate musicals are somehow lining up. One, because there is the lottery, which they introduce, and also the fact that they're selling the first 2 rows for $20.
Yeah, that was all kind of an interesting sort of thing. But I got to tell you, Patrick, in all honesty, all the ticket brokers who always stole the tickets, they stole the tickets for the first rows of Rent 2. I mean, they put diggers there and they put planters there, and all those corrupt guys were just stealing all the seats forever.
But it did invent rent heads, right? Rent heads came along, that would later be Newsies head or whatever else. It did create this generational switch, the young generation. I want to come back to Sunset Boulevard. And what is palpable in your book, Michael, is a sense of betrayal in a way. As you said earlier, Andrew Lloyd Webber fired Patti LuPone, hired Glenn Close, fired Faye Dunaway. Do you think that it is permissible in the theater to betray in order to protect the work, to save the work, which Andrew Lloyd Webber thought he was doing at the time?
Listen, he fired Patti LuPone because Frank Rich, who was then the powerful critic for the New York Times, came in and reviewed the show in London and said Patti LuPone is miscast. Now, Andrew Lloyd Webber had been beaten 6 ways to Sunday by Frank Rich in the New York Times. How could he possibly bring in his new show to Broadway with a leading lady that Frank Rich said is miscast in London? He can't do it. He could not. I mean, the irony of all this is that Frank then stepped down from the critic's job.
But getting back to the question, do you think Andrew Lloyd Webber is right? Do you think an artist or a producer is right in order to, if they feel that firing and betraying, basically, Tony Kushner did it in Angels in America by going with George C. Wolfe instead of Oscar Eustis, who had developed it up to that point. Do you think that that is just the nature of theater? And if you feel you got to make these artistic choices, you make them.
Yes, this is a brutal business and you have to make brutal decisions.
And did you find in your book and in your research that there was any loyalty at all?
I mean, Patrick, loyalty in showbiz does not exist. It's all about selling tickets. And if something doesn't work, you have to put the knife in the person that you may have embarked on the original conversation with, the original product with. But if it doesn't work, yes, you have to slit the throat of your best friend. And you and I mean, we would do that to each other. I mean, I love you.
Michael, I would never slit you in the throat. I'd like to from time to time, especially because you were late for this interview. But other than that, yes, I'd like to
Well,
slit you in the throat.
you know,
But
as my old friend Clive Barnes, the great critic Clive Barnes said, you know what? To be a critic, you have to be willing to slit your mother's throat. And I think that is the modus operandi of everybody on Broadway.
I mean, in terms of angels in America, I mean, there was a certain sense of loyalty. In your book, you do say that Tony Kushner insisted that the cast on the West Coast, and forgive me if I'm mixing this up, but part of the cast or some of the cast, he wanted to take the whole cast. And I think there was a compromise in terms of, yes, you can bring half of the cast, but half of the cast is going to be renewed. So there's not entirely a ruthlessness on Broadway.
No, but the cast that came to New York, Patrick, from the West Coast, they were the people that Frank Rich, who went out there and said they were great, and everyone he said wasn't good, they all got cut out, and that's showbiz.
Do you think that there is a sense among artists as well as producers that fear is heightened because the stakes and reputations are so high, and that's what leads to these kind of conundrums and conflict that you very well chronicle in the book?
I think that people set out to be friends. They're comrades in art. And yet when you get to the real politics of Broadway and what's going to sell tickets, and things begin to get a little crazy and a little wavering, I think that's when people cut and run, because there is so much money at stake. There's reputations on the line. And I think when they get scared, that's when they betray their friends. And that, Patrick, on Broadway is when the fun begins.
What's interesting in your chapter on Titanic is that it has an extremely troubled, it is in trouble. It's in trouble all the way up to opening night. And it gets terrible reviews, or mostly terrible, if not mixed reviews. And then it wins a Tony Award for Best Musical, and that kind of turns it around. What does this say about good producing, if indeed it is a lesson of good producing, that the Dodgers were able to do all through that period? We should say that the Dodgers were the main producing entity of Titanic.
Well, I think Michael David, who produced Titanic, and Peter Stone and Maury Yeston, who wrote it, they had a sense that, all clear, dead ahead. And we cannot, and this was the interesting thing about Titanic. They said, okay, we're in for this thing. We're going to sail across the ocean. We got to get to the other side. So then they began to think, all right, let's clamp down on the press. Let's have meetings that are not in the traditional theater district restaurants where you and I would have picked up, all the gossip. But they had a brilliant idea. They said, all right, we're not going to have meetings at Angus McIndoe or Joe Allen or Orso, because people like, Patrick Pacheco and Michael Riedel will be picking up the vibes. Because, we were like, we probably were sleeping with the busboys and the maitre d' chorus girls.
In your dreams. Get to the point, Michael.
But they knew that we would pick up on that stuff. So they created a war room in a hotel where they would only talk about the show in that hotel. And then they put that show together. And I have to say, and this is kind of one of the unsung shows of Broadway, Titanic is a great show. I think it's a masterpiece. I think Maury Yeston's score is beautiful. Peter Stone's book is beautiful. And they hit it. They hit it from us, even though we knew that it was a disaster. But then they unveiled it to Rosie O'Donnell. And we forget, Rosie O'Donnell was the Ed Sullivan of the 1990s, as I show in my book. She had 7 million women who looked at her show every single morning, and they bought the tickets to Broadway shows.
She was also, in your book, she also plays that pivotal role with The Lion King as well, which of course was this enormous surprise and sort of flew in the face of the fears that Broadway was turning into Disneyfication of Broadway. Julie Taymor emerges as the heroine of The Lion King, but I understand that she was not entirely happy with her portrayal in your book. What was that about?
Oh, Patrick, you You little old Walter Winchell in the days then. Julie was not happy because Julie wants to be seen as someone who saved everything. But, Julie was not happy with my book so far. I have not heard from her yet or her lawyers, but I'll be all right on that front. Julie was someone who got The Lion King to a certain point, and then there was a kind of disruption where Disney was concerned about what she was doing. I remember interviewing her, and she told me that the people from the coast, West Coast, LA, Michael Eisner and his coterie of people, they thought, what's this nonsense? You got the thing on the head, the puppets on the head, the face is here. We can't see between the two. Now, Julie, to her genius credit, she understood that when it's lit well, when it's in the theater, the audience will understand it. But the West Coast people couldn't. And I remember this vividly in my book. After they did that first workshop for The Lion King, Peter Schneider and Tom Schumacher, our old friends, they left thinking, oh my God, this is dead. The show is dead. Michael Eisner actually said to Tom Schumacher, get Aida ready. This thing is dead.
Right.
And then it was Peter Schneider who said, Julie, we failed you. We did not light your things properly. We did not do your puppets properly. We have to get this back in front of Michael. And they did a workshop for The Lion King for one person and one person only. And that was Michael Eisner. And Julie did various puppetry. She did like a Cats kind of thing, a hybrid of Cats and her thing. And then she did her own thing with that brilliant puppetry on the head. And the puppet masters are behind the scenes, moving the paws around. And Michael Eisner, to his great credit, said, you know what? The bigger the risk, the bigger the reward. And he went with her original vision. And that paid off, because to this day, The Lion King is the most lucrative entertainment property of all time, having grossed $9 billion.
Talking about the bigger the risk, the bigger reward is, again, Chicago is a good, point in your book about someone, the Weislers here, Fran and Barry Weislers, the producers, who are willing to risk and defy the one rule in show business, which is don't put your money in a show. People now looking back, and you write this very well, would look at this and say it would be a no-brainer to invest. But in fact, nobody wanted to invest, and they had to put up 75% of the entire investment. And later, this show grossed $700 million on Broadway alone, much less the international touring shows. Why did nobody want to invest?
Well, because remember, Patrick, you remember Encores, right? It was like four performances as a concert at City Center. So Fran and Barry Weisler, dear friends of mine, they go to see this show on the third performance, I guess, and they loved it. They absolutely loved it. And then just before intermission, some guy stood up from his seat and had a massive heart attack and fell in the aisle. And Marsha Lewis, remember Marsha Lewis?
Sure.
She was a trained nurse.
Played Mama Morton or Big Mama?
Mom, yeah, she played Mama Morton. Marsha Lewis was a trained nurse. So she jumped off the stage and she tried to revive this guy who was dying in the aisle. And then the ambulance comes in, they took him out. And Fran and Bear were thinking, oh my God, well, the show's dead. I mean, the guy just died in the audience. And then Bebe Neuwirth came out and she said, welcome back, suckers. And the audience went crazy. And Fran and Barry thought, my God, if this show can play through death, it's got something there.
But they were the only ones. What's just fascinating.
What happened was they thought if this show can play through death, we can do this on Broadway. And so Fran called Fred Ebb and she said, Fred, can you give us a little piece of the show? And he said, Fran, nobody is called. Nobody was interested because why? It was a concert. Nobody is going to pay $75. That was the top ticket price back in those days, Patrick. You remember? No one's going to pay $75 to see a concert, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Fran and Barry thought, all right, let's try to raise the money, bring it to Broadway. it had no chandelier, it had no turntable, it had no helicopter. This was still the hangover of the British spectacles.
Right.
And this was just a show with people in tuxedos and, William Ivy Long's great, black costumes. And Fran and I interview her in this book, and she said, we tried to raise the money. The bank wouldn't give them money. The people who invested in their shows wouldn't give them the money. And Fran and Barry, they got into bed one night, and this is a great, I think, bit in my book. Fran said, "You know what? We got to do this, Barry." And he said, "Yes, we have to. We have to put our own money in the show."
Right.
Violating Mel Brooks's rule. And Fran said she pulled the covers over her head and said, "What have we done? What have we done?"
And then the theater owners gave them such a rough time, and Rocco Landesman, who's running Jujamcyn, right? Promises them the theater, and then reneges because he's got Whistle Down the Wind, Andrew Lloyd Webber's big show, big hit, and that closes out of town. So does this mean that nobody knows nothing, as they say in show business?
Well, it's what William Goldman said in the great William Goldman's great phrase: "Nobody knows anything in show business. Nobody knows anything." And the great thing about Patrick, all the stuff we've covered over the years, and I try to get at this in the book, is that, listen, Rent is going to be a hit. Chicago is going to be a hit. The Lion King is going to be a hit. But the people who created them, they did not know at the moment in time they were trying to do these things that they were going to be hits.
Right.
And so I went back to everybody, and I thought, I can't write a book say, "Oh, Rent is going to be transformative, and Chicago is going to be a great show, and The Lion King is going to be a big hit." That's not the book that I wrote. I went back and I interviewed all of these people. And I think if the book has any value, it just tells you that you do not know what you have until, as my old friend Peter Stone, who wrote 1776 and Titanic, said, he said to me once, "Michael, you do not know what you have until you put your show up in front of 1,500 people who don't know you and who paid for their tickets."
You delivered your manuscript to your publishers just as COVID was hitting. Did you panic because your subtitle, "The Triumph of Broadway," became instantly ironic?
I never panic, frankly. But I did think, okay, well, what's going on here? Because I turned that book in February, and then March we were shut down here on Broadway. And my great editor, Ben Lunan at Simon & Schuster, said, "You know what? Your book is your book. It's about Broadway in the 90s. And it ends with, how Broadway came back in September 11th. And that's why I called it The Triumph of Broadway." Because, Patrick, you and I were there. I mean, we know how Broadway came back so strong back then. And he said, just write it forward, putting into context. And the sad thing for me about this is that people forget this, but we really thought that Broadway was finished in 2001, September 11th. I mean, you did not know there were terrorist attacks all over the place. It could have been Times Square. There could have been theaters that were taken over by terrorists. We did not know. But somehow Broadway rallied. And the terrible thing about this pandemic is that after September 11th, we wanted to be together. We wanted to come together. We had to be together to just show that New York, that Broadway was strong. And now with the pandemic, we can't be together.
And this humbling of Broadway, what good will come out of it, do you think?
It's not going to be good, Patrick, because so many of our friends have lost their livelihoods. And so many people are going to be out of jobs for a long time. And we have to recognize that and understand that. The only good thing that I think can come out of it is that the ticket prices got obscene on Broadway.
Right.
Hamilton for $1,000. I mean, come on. You and I.
It will become more affordable, and it will actually draw the old traditional theater going public.
Exactly. I mean, Broadway has to figure out how to come back, but it cannot come back and say, "Hey guys, we're open again. And here's another, see Hamilton for $1,000. Broadway got too greedy. It got too greedy. It wanted to push the prices as far as it could go. And if you want people to come back, if you want the next generation of people who are going to create Rent, right, you have to make it affordable. And the only good thing about the pandemic is that Broadway will have to figure out an economic structure that will make the ticket price affordable again for a lot of young people who will be the next generation to carry this great art form forward.
And that traditional theater going audience that dropped out, people would see theater, Harvey Firestein's family would go to the theater en masse. Those families are no longer going to the theater because it's too expensive. Maybe that will come back and inspire young Harvey Firesteins to create the art. I think that that's probably one of the good things that one can certainly hope for. As they say, nobody knows nothing. And as you know, fear and passion and everything else are all part of what you so well chronicle in your book. And I don't doubt that fear and passion and commitment and craziness will be there for another generation.
Well, the thing, Patrick, is that theater cannot live if it's only for the 1%. And I hope when this thing is over, it will be for the 99%.
Well, I'll drink to that. I'm sure we'll reconvene at another time and have a real gab fest together.
Patrick is my oldest friend in the world. We've been together for how long? I mean, since
I don't know, since the 1800s. Anyway, since Broadway was invented. Anyway, thank you so much for spending time with us, and can't wait to see the sequel to this book. And thank you for joining us. We look forward to bringing you more fascinating conversations with artists and thought leaders as New York theater, that fabulous invalid, regains its place in American culture. I'm Patrick Pacheco.